Hi, my name is Rosa Ramirez, and this is my final presentation for the key activity. And my research question is, how does the length of a pendulum affect its motion time? A pendulum is a body suspended from a fixed point, which swings back and forth under the influence of gravity. In this research, I did one of the most common and interesting experiments regarding a pendulum, in which I saw how does the length of a pendulum affected its motion time. And as I already mentioned, my research question was, how does the length of a pendulum affect its motion time? Galileo Galilei was one of the first to investigate the pendulum, its motion, and how it worked. He did experiments to see which factors affected a pendulum oscillation time and period. He experimented with mass and the length and size of the swing of the pendulum and many other variables. After Galileo's discovery, the pendulum was given more uses, for example, to keep track of time, and that was very important. Methodology. Variables. The independent variable in this experiment was the length of the pendulum, and the dependent variable was time. There were many other variables which needed to be controlled. For example, the mass of the object and the size and shape of the object. And these were controlled by using the same object, which was a marble, throughout the experiment. There was also the angle of release and the initial velocity, and both of these were controlled by releasing from the same angle. Air resistance, which was controlled by using the same pendulum through the whole experiment, and gravity, which was already controlled because it is a variable that never changes. Experimental design. To get this experiment done, I first built the pendulum. To build this, I used materials like a pen, a marble, string, and Scotch tape. First, I taped the pen to a table, and when this was stable, I tied the string to the pen, and then I tied a marble to the string. Then I recorded 10 videos, and in each one, I changed the length of the pendulum string. And with a chronometer, I measured the time it took the pendulum to make 10 oscillations. And then I divided that time between 10. And the time or the result that it gave me was the time that my pendulum took to complete one oscillation. And after that, I collected the data in 3 different tables. The materials I used were a pen, a marble, string, Scotch tape, a chronometer, a measuring tape, and a cell phone camera. Regarding the data collection instruments that I used, I used a chronometer to measure the time and a measuring tape to measure the length of the pendulum string. To collect the data, I used 3 tables, as I already mentioned. In the first one, I put my measured period versus the length of the string. In the second one, I put the theoretical period, which I got with a formula I will later mention, versus the length of the string also. And in the last table, I compare both the measured and theoretical period with the length of the string. And the lengths that I use for the string are the ones that appear in the screen, which goes from 0.20 meters to 0.65 meters. Measurement recording. The period of a pendulum, which is represented with the letter T, is the time that it takes the pendulum to make one oscillation, and this is measured in seconds. To calculate the period of my pendulum, what I did was that I timed with a chronometer the time it took my pendulum to make 10 oscillations. Then I divide that time between 10, which gave me the time it took my pendulum to complete one oscillation. And after that, I collected the data in a table in which I compared the measured period with the length of the string. And as we can see in the graphic, as the length of the string raised, also did the period. Measurement analysis. To calculate the pendulum's theoretical period, I used the formula stated by Britannica 2020. And they mentioned that the formula for the period T of a pendulum is T is equal to 2 pi multiplied by the root of L between G, where L is the length of the pendulum and G is the acceleration due to gravity. For this equation, our length should be in meters, and I use 9.81 as the value of gravity. And in this part, we can also see how the length of the string does affect the period of the pendulum. Conclusion. As we can see in the graphs, my measured and theoretical time were very close, but there was an error that caused my measured period to be delayed a few milliseconds. And we can also see that the length of the string of the pendulum does affect its period, because the longer the string, the longer the period. And if the string was shorter, it also took less time for the pendulum to complete one oscillation. And we can also prove this fact if we read what Teach Engineering 2020 states. They say that a pendulum with a longer string has a lower frequency, meaning it swings back and forth less times in a given amount of time than a pendulum with a shorter string. This makes that the pendulum with the longer string completes less back and forth cycles in a given amount of time, because each cycle takes more time. To conclude, I can say that the answer for my research question is yes, the length of the string does affect a pendulum motion time, because as we could see in the graphs, as the length of the string raised, also did the time. Regarding my experiment, we could see that there was a minimum error in my measurements. And this error was in the method I used to measure the time, because as I started and ended the timer when I thought it had already completed the 10 oscillations, even though I had a chronometer with me, as I was doing it by eye, maybe from the time that I saw that it started till I click on the timer until I ended it, I could have delayed a few milliseconds, and that could have caused my mistake. And an improvement I can suggest for these experiments would be to use an infrared sensor and to put this in the middle of the pendulum. So it will detect exactly when the pendulum passes through the middle, and by using this, it will reduce the error in my times, because it would calculate the period in a more exact way. And these are some of the references that I used inside in this investigation. Thank you.